Hey, welcome back everyone into the Wells Tech Garage for class number 4 of our little Toyota timing chain diagnosis. In class 1 we talked about the code P0016, what it was, what it meant for this engine, how it's a bank 1 cam correlation problem, and then we checked the VCT solenoids, made sure they functioned, and also made sure that the phasers were able to move and almost kill our engine. In class number 2, we talked about relative compression, performed a relative compression test, and found out that bank 1 is definitely low on compression compared to bank 2. In class number 3, we discussed and tested the cam and crank sensors and found that the bank 1 cam sensor was not where it's supposed to be. Bank 1 and bank 2 cam sensors are not lined up the way they're supposed to be. All right, so today, what do we need to prove out? And left you guys with kind of a question of, is this an intermittent problem, or why is this an intermittent problem? So is it an intermittent failure? Is it really? Well, we're going to get in and we're going to really dive deep today in some discussion around proving out, first of all, why VVT is not an issue, proving out whether or not this is intermittent or not, determining if the timing chain is jumped, or if it's stretched, and when I say jumped, I mean like cam jumped a tooth or something like that. We want to find out how far out of time it is. We want to learn how an analog to digital converter works inside the PCM, and we want to compare our signal against a known good. Okay? So is it really an intermittent problem? Code set criteria and monitor run criteria are vital for this, okay? And here's why. So our target and actual cam correlation needs to be 5 degrees difference or less. Okay, that gives us a 5-degree window of crank angle. That's 5 degrees of crank angle or less for our cams to be out of time. Okay, when the computer runs this test, it shuts off the VVT and our cams go to the fully retarded position. This condition must be present for more than 18 seconds, and our monitor begins to run after 5 minutes of idling. There is a reason this is big and bold right here, guys. After 5 minutes of idling. Think for a minute, when is the last time you idled your car for 5 minutes? If you're not a cop sitting and clocking people on the side of the road, when's the last time you idled for 5 minutes straight? And then after that, we need 18 additional seconds in order to test and see that our cam is at least 5 degrees out of time for that entire 18 seconds, okay? Remember that code reader that was sitting in the glove box? This customer was clearing his own codes. He's been driving this vehicle for almost a year now. He had been clearing his own codes, thinking that the problem was intermittent because he'd clear the code and a couple days, maybe a week later, the light would come back on. He didn't realize that it was that extended period of idling that was turning the light back on. If you were to clear the codes in this vehicle and idled it for at least 5 minutes, you would set a code in this thing. Okay? So our problem is not intermittent whatsoever. There's no intermittent problem here at all. Our cam timing is off. We proved that it's off, and it's not an intermittent failure whatsoever. The intermittent part of this is because our customer was clearing out his light. Okay? All right. So why can't it be VVT? Why do I know our timing's off and it's not a VVT issue? Well, first of all, this right here, the computer shuts off our VVT solenoid, and the cam goes to a fully retarded position. Okay? So the question was brought up then of what if the cam solenoid, the VCT solenoid, was stuck partly open or something like that. At 0% oil pressure applied to the phaser, it sits in its fully retarded position. So if you were to leak a little bit of pressure down into that phaser, it would open up or change our timing. Okay? So let's just do a little drawing here. Okay. At the top, this is going to be our VVT or VCT, whatever you guys are used to referring to this as. This is our solenoid. Okay, we got a connector here with wiring going back to our PCM. Okay, PCM is controlling our VVT solenoid, usually ground side control. Doesn't really matter at this point because we know at this point that this solenoid was turned off by the computer for the test. So we have, and I'm just going to draw it really generically, we have oil pressure sitting here, right? And when the solenoid is off, oil pressure is not able to pass through the solenoid and get into our cam phaser. Okay, we turn the VCT solenoid on, and it's going to flow oil pressure. Again, this is very generically drawn, but we're able to flow oil pressure through our VCT solenoid and into our phaser. So our phaser is going to look something like this. Bear with me here. I'm not much of an artist. Okay, this is a quarter of our phaser. Okay, in all reality, we would have 4 sections, something like this, with veins in there that are going to move. Okay, so let's draw our vein. And what did we see here? At 0 oil pressure, cam sensors, our phaser is going to sit at the fully retarded position. So let's draw in this vein. So at 0 oil pressure, we're sitting at the fully retarded position. All right, now we're here. So let's say we have oil pressure, the VCT solenoid is currently on, we have oil pressure and it flows in behind our vein. At this point, what actually happens is this blue line, let's see if I can erase this nicely, hey, that's not so bad. Our blue line would actually move, okay? We would shift this entire phaser, would be shifted as we build up oil pressure inside of here, okay? We build up oil pressure inside of it, and this is just really basic VVT operation. I'm going to do a class on this in the future, but just for today, we're building up oil pressure inside the phaser, and it's shifting our timing, okay? But when we shift our timing, we are advancing our timing, okay? Our timing is being advanced as we're putting oil pressure in here. Now, if we look back at our timing issue, our recording that I took from last time. Let's bring it up on the screen here. If we look at this, our timing is not advanced. All right, as we load here, let's lay these on top of each other again. There we go. And let's grab this right here. And we got to turn off our active filtering, get some square edges back on here. Okay, there we go. So here's our timing. We know that bank 1 is our problem, right? Bank 1 is our blue cam. This is our problem. This is what we're coding. And it's occurring after. Again, this is a time window. So we're in time here. This is milliseconds. We're in time. The bank 1 cam is happening after it's supposed to. It is happening after. That means it's retarded in timing. It's not advanced. We're not leaking pressure inside here. If we were, and this were advancing, we would see this blue trace right here. We would see it back here somewhere. Okay? This blue trace is not being advanced. It is being retarded. Okay? So if we draw this out again, what did we say? When there's no oil flow, when there's no oil pressure, so we're going to turn our solenoid off. When there's no oil flow through our solenoid, so we're going to, no oil flow, our phaser sits in its fully most retarded position, okay? There's no way that this thing's able to move more retarded than its mechanical stopping points, okay? It's metal. Metal on metal, this thing is not going to move past in any way, okay? It's only able to advance from here. So this is how Toyota knows that this thing can't have a VVT issue. This is why our P0016 code description and diagnostics points us immediately to a timing issue, mechanical timing chain issue, rather than a VVT issue, okay? So our VVTs cannot be the problem because our bank 1 cam signal is coming in retarded compared to our bank 2 signal, okay? It's not coming in advanced. All right? We'll erase this. So that is how we know that there is a mechanical timing issue and not a VVT issue. All right, so what is, changing gears, what is an A to D converter, an analog to digital converter? First of all, we need to remember a computer does not understand analog signals. It doesn't understand AC voltage. It doesn't understand anything underneath 0. So if we have, let's use black, if we have a analog signal like this, which is exactly like our crank sensor, right? Our computer doesn't understand anything that happens below the 0 line. So let's just draw a 0 line in here. All right, so this is 0 volts right here. That dotted line is 0 volts. Our computer is not understanding any of this. So we'll just take this out of here, right? We don't need that. Here's the start of our digital signal. This is starting to look like a digital signal, like a Hall effect, right? Computer only speaks, in ones and zeros. It needs to be made digital. It's going to look very similar to our cam sensors. Now, I just need to note, you guys, that I found no documentation from Toyota on what this signal is supposed to look like. This is purely speculation, purely an idea based upon knowledge and experience dealing with this. This is not necessarily exactly how Toyota does it at this point, okay? So Toyota could come back and say, that's not how we do it this way, whatever. This is based on speculation and knowledge. And an example, if you guys want to try this yourself, grab yourself a GM with a 3.4 liter with the standalone ignition module, scope the crank sensor input that goes into that ignition control module, and scope the digital signal output that comes out of it, and layer the two images on top of each other. There you can see the analog to digital conversion. So what's typically going to happen is we're going to have this threshold, right? Here's our 0 volt mark. Our computer is going to have this threshold. So let's zoom in on this even more. So let's just I'm going to grab one of our peaks. So our signal is going to come up, and it's going to go down below our 0 line, and it's actually going to look more like this. And so let's say that here's our 0 line again. Okay, so there's 0 volts. Now our computer is going to have this threshold that it's going to look for. Let's call it a switch. It's got a transistor in there. Let's call it a switch. Every time our signal passes that switch, our signal either goes high or low. Let's call it a 1 or a 0 or 5 volts or 0 volts, whatever you want to call it. It's going to come across as a square wave. So it would look something like this. Let's say that our threshold for this vehicle we're at, let's call it 1 volt. Okay? So here's our threshold for this vehicle. We're at a 1 volt threshold. So every time our analog signal passes 1 volt, it will either signal up or signal down. And then we have to look at this in time. So if we're looking at this, our signal would go like this. We're low, and then as soon as our analog signal crosses our threshold, what do? We go signal high. All right? And this is going to happen very, very quickly. The goal is to turn this thing on and off very quickly from a 1 to a 0 or a 5 volt to 0 volt or whatever helps you to understand this. But where we cross, and I did a very poor job here of crossing right here. All right. That way, if you zoom in on this shot, you'll see that our blue line, our digital created signal, is crossing at our threshold, okay? And now in time, we stay high on our signal until we cross here again. So we're going to draw our line down. This is going to connect. And there we go. So now you can see how we end up with a digital signal coming from an analog signal. So if you had multiple of these, like we started with, so we're gonna look like this. Okay, so there's our analog signal. We have a 0 line across here. All right, remember our computer doesn't see anything below 0, so I'll erase those out. Then we have, let's call it again, a 1 volt threshold. Like so. You would end up with a signal that would look something like this. Again, guys, I'm not much of an artist, but that is what you would end up with. Something like that. You would take, they're kind of shrinking as they go along, but the point is still there. The amplitude here is going to be determined by the computer. This will probably be, 0 to 1 or whatever the computer wants at that point. The amplitude doesn't matter. What matters is where they cross our threshold, turns it on and turns it off. Okay, that is where the computer is measuring from. That is what it's looking for with an analog signal. Now, why is this important? Why do we really care how it all works? What does it matter to us as technicians of how this functions? Well, if we look back, right here, target and actual 5 degrees difference or less. We need to have an understanding of what 5 degrees looks like in time on a lab scope. Okay, we need to be able to correlate a crank angle amount to a time window. Okay, that's what we need to be able to do. So we need to be able to figure out, and again, this is speculation, but exactly where this threshold is. Now, on a lot of these analog signals, it's very low voltage. Okay, we're crossing at a small amount, and then we're crossing again at another small amount. We're just using 1 volt here just as reference. Okay, but now what this means is that wherever we lay a digital signal over this, so our cam signal, remember our cam sensors, they came in something like this, and then they would cross, and then they would go like this. That would be like the bank 1 signal. And then if you remember, our bank 2 signal came in something like this, okay? So if they were to both cross in this window, that's probably okay. We don't have anything yet that we know of to determine time, but they're supposed to cross at the same time, and that crossing is important. And, well, why don't we get right into that part? So now that we understand how this analog to digital converter works, we can figure out, first of all, why this computer set a code, exactly what it's looking at, and we're going to be able to figure out if our timing chain is jumped or if we have a stretched chain. All right, let's get this all out of the way. Okay, so we got to start doing our measurements here. Now, we need to understand that our crank shaft goes around in 360 degrees, okay? 1 crankshaft revolution equals 1/2 camshaft revolution. Inversely, 1 camshaft revolution equals 2 crankshaft revolutions, okay? So that's going to be important. We're going to be talking today in crank angles, so we need to understand that our spec, 5 degrees of crank angle, 5 degrees of crank angle down here, is going to be equivalent to 2.5 degrees of cam angle. And inversely, if you had 10 degrees of cam angle off, you would be seeing a 20-degree angle off on the crankshaft, okay? It's very important for us to get that out of the way right away. So I'm going to put that up on the board. So you have, let's go 10 degrees crank angle equals 5 degrees cam angle, okay? Crank angle is what we're going to be working with today. I'm going to abbreviate that with CA will be crank angle, okay? So we're working in crank angle, and now it's important that we work in crank angle because that's what our spec is in. Our spec was 5 degrees of crank angle. So how do we determine our cam sensor and if it's out of spec according to crank angle? Well, we got to look at our waveform, right? All right, so here's our waveform. This is what we're looking at. Let's first of all start with just the crankshaft. Let's figure out what our crank angle is. So what we want to do is we want to bring up 1 full revolution of the crankshaft. So that's opening here to opening. So this is that crankshaft going around 1 time and the sensor picking up on the missing teeth, okay? According to Toyota's service information, there's 34 teeth on this wheel. So we have 34 teeth on our crank wheel, okay? There's 34 There's not actually 34 tick marks here. But then we have this opening here, and that's what we're seeing right here. This is those missing teeth, okay? And now, how do we know how many teeth are missing? A lot of times, you'll have a crankshaft pulley that would have one missing tooth. Now, it's not always going to work this way for us, but we're pretty fortunate in the fact that this thing has 34 teeth, and it is actually missing 2 teeth on here. Now, how do we figure that out? Well, let's zoom in and look at this, okay? So now we have to start using time to our advantage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cursor, and I'm going to put it on the peak here, very close to it. We don't need to be 100% accurate, but we want to be close. And we're roughly, let's call it 2 milliseconds from peak to peak of this analog signal, okay? So that would tell me that if I take and bunny hop this to 2 milliseconds, roughly, there should be a peak right here, okay? So our missing peak would be right here. And if I take and I do that again and get it to 2 milliseconds, there would be another peak right here. And if I do that one more time, we should line up on this peak right here at roughly 2 milliseconds. Let's see. Boy, that's pretty close. So that's telling me that we have 36 total teeth to work with. Now that makes our math really, 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 really easy. So 34 teeth plus 2 missing gives us a total of 36 teeth, giving us the equivalent of 1 tooth equals 10 degrees of crank angle. Okay? Don't judge my handwriting. That's why I work with the computer most of the time. 1 tooth, 10 degrees of crank angle. Makes our math really, really, really easy. That also means that 1 tooth here is equivalent to 5 degrees of cam angle. We don't really care at this point, but I just want you guys to remember it's going to be half. All right, so what exactly does this mean? Let's take a look. Let's get these cursors out of the way. And let's bring our cam and both cam signals back in here. All right, so here we go. Now let's back this up, because remember, with our analog to digital converter, we have to be able to measure 5 degrees of crank angle, right? So if we look at this, I'm going to back this up. I'm going to go, well, actually, let's just take this. Let's go here, and I'm going to take this screenshot. I'm going to go ahead and copy it. And let's go Google Draw. Let's copy it in here. And let's apply our, oh, we're maybe a little too big there. All right. Now, let's apply what we know now, or what we speculate, I should say, about our digital signal. So what we were saying is that we ignore anything below the 0 line. So let's go ahead and draw a line here at 0. This green line here indicates 0 also. But let's go like this. Let's draw a dotted line. So this is our 0 line right here. Now remember, anything below 0 is ignored by the computer. And I think it's important to note here, guys, oops, it's important to note that our cam sensors are not on the same scale as this dotted line. This right here is 0 volts for both cam sensors, okay? It's important to note that our crank and our cams are on different scales, okay? So we're looking at this. Now let's draw in our threshold. So if we said it's roughly 1 volt, and again, this is all speculation. I don't have any proof saying that it is 1 volt. I'm just going off of speculation and what we think it should be, potentially, based on other vehicles that we've tested, okay? So, oops. This would be our threshold right here. This would be our threshold of where a digital signal crosses, okay? So let's draw some lines. So we would see something like this. We cross, the signal goes high, and we cross, the signal goes low. and we stay low until we cross again. We go high. I'm going to try to make sure all these connect. And then we stay low until we cross again. But now the problem here is now we're low all the way until here. And then we go back high. Then we stay high until, oops, that's way off. Then we stay with our signal high until, right about here. Okay? So let me just see if I can grab these. Kind of make them bigger. Easier. Uh-oh. All right. Okay, so this is what our digital signal would look like. Now, what did we say? We said peak to peak here was 10 degrees of cam timing. That would mean that this peak to this peak, if we're missing 2, this would be a total of 30 degrees of travel. There's no way that the computer is measuring our cam signals in here. There's no way that we're going to allow this thing, we're going to allow our potential measuring points to be a potential 30-degree difference, right? Because we have, I'm saying that right? So we would have one here. This would be our next peak at roughly 10 degrees. We would have another peak. That'd be another 10 and another peak. So yeah, 30 degrees. There's no way that our computer is going to look at both of these signals to cross at the low point at this point. I don't think, I know we focused on this in the last class, but I don't think that our computer is watching our signal at this point, our cam signals, okay? It just doesn't make sense. It's not going to be able to verify if both cam signals were to cross at either a low point or a high point, because we have so much wiggle room here. If this was the case, this thing wouldn't be setting a check engine light, right? Because both signals crossed the plane during a low point on the camshaft, on the crankshaft, okay? What's more likely is they're crossing at a point of similar direction, okay? Here we have cam signal 2 going low. Here we have cam signal 1 going high. What I'm thinking, and again, guys, this is purely speculation. I have no proof. But what I'm thinking is happening is we're going to get and here we are. We're going to get a point where both cam signals cross from low to high at the same time against the crankshaft, okay? So let's grab this image. All right, so we grab it. Let's copy it into here. Actually, let's grab a new file so it's not all messy behind there. All right, maybe we'll still be able to keep this one up. Nice. All right, so we'll grab this. Let's make this bigger. All right. So now, if we draw in I wonder if we can, because I'm using still the same time scale, I might be able to just copy and paste this over. Okay, let's Control C. Fingers crossed this works. What did we do? Nope. I grabbed the whole thing. Let's, come on. Is it going to work now? Nope. Okay, guess I can't. All right, so we'll just draw it again really quickly. So again, we have our 0 line coming across. This is our 0 line. This is going to be our dotted line. This is 0. All right, and then we have, we'll call it again 1 volts. 1 volt. This will be a dashed line. This is our threshold. And then from here we have, our digital signal starting. So we go signal, we go signal high, see if we can do this. Let's go signal high, signal low. Hey, there we go. Signal high, somewhere about there, signal low, signal high. Oops. So that's our signal high, and then we go signal low again. And then obviously this would just keep continuing, so on and so on and so on, okay? Whoa. Without those. Okay, so what we're looking at now, let's see if we can zoom in on this. What we're looking at now is, here's our digital signal. Okay, we're at a high point, a low point, high point. So let's just call these ones and zeros. 1, 0, 1, 0. Our bank 2 cam sensor crossed at 0, crossed at a low point on the crank. Now our bank 1 cam signal crossed at a high point. Okay, the computer recognizes this. It says, I think that our bank 2 cam signal was supposed to cross at a low point. And it didn't. It crossed at a high point. So what must be wrong? It must be out of time, okay? So what is this exactly? How do we know, how does the computer know what that 5-degree window is? And now what I would assume to be would be that it's measuring, this threshold is measuring, and it must be a 5-degree window between these two peaks, okay? That's my assumption, my speculation, that if we were to be able to somehow see inside of the PCM and see this digital signal, a good running vehicle would have these two cross at either a low peak or at a low signal or a high signal. So if we were to draw this out, we would see crankshaft digital signal. Okay, here's our crank signal. And let's bring in our blue trace, and currently they're both coming in low and going high. I think this is what we're supposed to see. And these would be very, very, very close to being on top of each other, okay? All right. Now, that is why we're out of time, partially, okay? We are definitely out of time, but how far out of time are we? We're saying this peak to this peak would be 10 degrees, okay? If we look at this, digital signal to digital signal, if we are following this potential speculation, this would be 5 degrees, this would be 10 degrees, right? All right, so that would put this thing, if we're measuring here to here is 5 degrees, that would mean that our bank 2 cam would be roughly 2.5 degrees out of time. But we, again, need to figure that this might not be exactly accurate due to speculation. So all I'm trying to bring up here is that this thing is not jumped time, and that's because we're not very far out of time. It's out of time, it's in the next bracket, but we're not incredibly far out of time. And that is because, and we know that because it's very close, and our camshaft sprocket on here is 36 teeth. If that were to jump one tooth, if we were to jump a tooth on our cam sprocket, if this were to jump one tooth, that is equivalent to 10 degrees of camshaft angle, okay? What do we know about camshaft angle? It's got to be doubled for crank angle, right? So if we have 10 degrees of cam angle that's off because we jumped a tooth on our camshaft for bank 1, we would then have a 20-degree difference on our crank angle. This isn't 20-degree difference, okay? This is definitely not. If this to this we've determined as 10 degrees, I'm saying that we're maybe 9 or 10 degrees out of time potentially, somewhere in there. We definitely have not jumped a tooth on this engine, okay? Our timing chain, and again, this is just a belt, it's just something to help demonstrate, but our timing chain has not jumped a tooth, our chain has stretched, okay? So why don't we go one step further into proving that, okay? Let's compare against a known good. Fortunately, I do have another vehicle that I was able to test. So let's look at that. Let's get this out of the way. All right, so this is going to look very similar. I think I got all of the information the same to look exactly the same. And let's look at that same point where they both crossed at the upward swing. Okay, this is not it. Let's scroll back. Keep going. Okay, here we go. They're both crossing at that upward swing. Let's zoom in a little bit further. All right, you can see right away our signals are not perfectly lined up. Now we're zoomed in really, really, really far. We are currently now off, if we're talking in time, we are currently off 100 microseconds in time, okay? And for comparison purposes, our other camshaft is off 10 times as much, right? 100 microseconds is equivalent to 1 millisecond, right? So our other cam is off, this far. This cam, or this engine is off this far, 10 times as much as our known good, okay? Now what's interesting about this known good vehicle, it's got 240,000 miles on it with the original chain in there, and we are still in good shape, okay? So why is this thing passing if our signals aren't perfectly lined up? Well, that's because, just like this, they're falling within that 5-degree window that is acceptable by the computer. So as long as they both maintain inside of this window, it's happy. The computer's happy. We're good to go. Everybody is happy. We're not going to set a code on this engine. As soon as this signal were to end up over here, then we have an issue, okay? Again, this direction is retarding timing, okay? That's important to note. If our cam signal moves that way, we're retarding timing. It cannot be a VCT issue on this engine. If our cam signal were to move this way, if it's going to go that direction, this would be advancing timing. That is where the potential for a VCT issue could come in, okay? So that said, I think that's going to be probably about it. I think that kind of just sums up the analog to digital converter. And again, that's all speculation at this point. We don't have any proof exactly that that is where we're at, but it's based on knowledge and experience. The best way would be to actually be able to see it, but we can't. We know this thing is out of time. We know that our chain is stretched. There's a high probability that this signal is also out of time slightly, but not enough. And the reason why the chain can stretch, actually let's draw that out real quick. The reason why we can have chain stretch, because chain stretch affects the entire engine, but the reason why we have chain stretch and we only have a problem on one bank is because this is using a single chain, okay? So we have our, this would be CMP1, we have CMP2, we have an idler pulley, and we have CKP, or the crankshaft, okay? So our chain's going to go like this, just like a standard V6 motor, and we're going to operate in the clockwise direction. We have a timing chain tensioner over here, and the goal of this tensioner is to take slack out of the chain on the slack side because we're pulling the chain in this direction. Now, if the chain were to stretch, and this chain were to end up longer, and you had a rope, okay, if you had a rope that was stretched and you're trying to pull somebody to you, if that rope was longer, it would take you more time to get that person to you, right? Therefore, if we're looking at all these signals at the exact same time, this one would appear later, right? It takes longer. Now, why is it that both of these aren't out the exact amount? That's because of the way the chain stretches in this engine. So let's say that our chain is stretched, and the only place it can stretch is in this section right here. It's not going to stretch when it's on the cogs of the sprocket. It's only going to stretch on the parts that are under tension. So let's say that there's 15 links in between here and here that are stretching. And let's say that each of those links is giving us 0.01 inches of stretch, okay? That would mean that between our crankshaft position sensor and our camshaft position sensor on bank 2, they would be 15 thousandths of an inch, so 0.015 thousandths of an inch retarded or delayed from what they're supposed to be. Now this is compounded by this part of the chain. So let's say that there's 15 links here and 15 links here. So now we're adding another 0.015 and another 0.015, giving us a total of 0.045. Now our cam sensor on bank 1 is now 45 thousandths behind where it's supposed to be. That is why we can have a stretched chain and we can only have a code on one bank, okay, with a single uniform chain like this. If you have a dual chain motor, super common to just potentially only have one stretched chain causing a problem on one bank. This is exactly why a single chain motor with a single tensioner running on, we have guides in here that it's running on both sides. It's going to look something like that. They're going to run on guides. That is why, because our chain is stretched, it's going to take longer. Basically, this is what it's going to look like. Sometimes this is easier for me to visualize, okay? So we have this at the bottom. This is CKP, and we have another CKP. This is going to be good and bad, okay? So our CKP, now we have 15 links in between here that have stretched, okay? We have 15 links in between here that haven't stretched. Okay, this is obviously exaggerated, but this is just going to be our example. So now we have CKP2, CKP2. You can already see how much closer these are together, right? Now we have the same thing here. This would be CKP1, and this would be CKP1, okay? You can see that with a stretched chain, and this would be 30 links in total, and this is all figuratively speaking, right, based on our last drawing, we would have, and this is just horrible to scale, but just so you guys understand, this would be delayed, right? If you were pulling on this spot right here and pulling this towards you, these would come towards you slower than these would because of the chain stretch. And that chain stretch is exemplified by, is increased by the amount of links in between, okay? That is why we can have a single bank problem on a stretched timing chain. Our cam is definitely not out 20 degrees of crank angle. We have not jumped a tooth on this cam. I'm certain that we're going to see a stretched chain. When we pull this front cover off and compare our chains together, I bet that our new chain will be shorter than our old chain, okay? I think that's going to be about it. I know this was a ton of information and I spoke really fast. I think now it's time to get our hands dirty. So our repair is approved. The customer's approved the repair to go in and replace the timing chain, the tensioner, and the guides. So we're going to go in there, we're going to rip it apart and see what we can find. So I think it's time to get our hands dirty, but that's going to be tomorrow night. So thank you guys for watching today. I really hope that this all makes sense. I think it will. I really do appreciate you guys watching and sticking with me for this. And we'll see you guys tomorrow night. We'll get our hands dirty and we'll start ripping apart our Toyota 4Runner 4-liter. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.